Buenas and Hafa members and guests, welcome to the Guam Chamber of Commerce virtual 2021 September membership meeting. When our community reached the target of 80% vaccination, we had the false sense of hope that we were finally able to return to some semblance of normalcy. This was short-lived as the Delta variant took hold and caused large spikes in our positivity rates, hospitalization, and deaths. The daily counts have been sobering. It's especially impactful to our private sector, who once again are facing reductions in business activity and the depressing realization that our tourism industry will likely not have any meaningful recovery this year. Added to this is the cessation of PUA benefits for the 11,000 individuals who have relied on this to feed their families and pay their bills. Without a healthy and thriving business community, there will be limited jobs and limited hours for those who are employed. Raising the minimum wage in the midst of this economic crisis does not help in these times. If anything, it makes survival all the more precarious. Your Guam Chamber has continued to provide as much support and resources to our membership as possible during these difficult times, whether it's informational resources, training, or highlights on funding available. Our focus has remained on you, our members. We have also been hard at work on lobbying with senators and the governor for support of our private sector. We have fought for funding, participated in roundtable discussions on how to help our business community, and have advocated for legislation that supports our private sector. We remain steadfast on fighting for all of you and the thousands of people who need a job or more hours so they can support themselves and as well as their family. Federal funding has been the saving grace for many people. It has helped support our private sector through grants and loans to help sustain businesses through these difficult times. We have a strong advocate in Congress who continues to fight for more funding and more opportunities for us. Congressman Nicolas has maintained regular communication with our chamber leadership and has continued to fight for Guam's businesses and its employees. This has meant millions of dollars for our island. We are all looking forward to hearing from him today to learn what he has planned to continue his support of our private sector and our employees. Welcome, Congressman. We appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule to update our membership. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. Please be sure to read your chamber weekly updates from our awesome president, Catherine Castro, and her staff, Rebecca and Jackie. I'd like to now call on Catherine to update the membership on chamber business, as well as to formally introduce our guest speaker. Kat?
Good morning, and thank you so much, Christine. Welcome to our general membership meeting today, members. And there are just some announcements before we introduce our guest speaker today. We have a short introduction about this year's Toys for Tots program by Colonel Christopher Bopp, Commanding Officer, Marine Corps Base Guam, Marine Corps Base Camp Bloss. Here we go.
Half a day. First, I would like to start off by thanking the Guam Chamber of Commerce for hosting today's Toys for Tots kickoff meeting. For those who may not be aware, the Toys for Tots program began with a simple act of kindness. In 1947, Diane Hendricks handcrafted some dolls and asked her husband, Marine Corps Reserve Major Bill Hendricks, to deliver them to an organization that supports children in need. When he couldn't find one, she challenged him to create one. In that first year, he was able to get support from his local reserve unit, and they distributed 5,000 toys to children in the Los Angeles area. In his civilian job, Major Hendricks was the director of public relations at Warner Brothers Studios. He was friends with many celebrities and asked them to support the newly created program. As a personal favor to Major Hendricks, Walt Disney designed the first Toys for Tots poster, which included a miniature 3-car train that was adopted as the Toys for Tots logo and is still used today. Since its inception, Toys for Tots has distributed 604 million toys to 272 million children nationwide. This year marks our 12th year on Guam. And despite the challenges of an enduring pandemic, we have managed to come together and collect 9,817 toys on Guam in 2020, a record-breaking 21% more toys than the previous year. The success of the campaign would be extremely limited without the support we receive from all of our partners, including the Chamber of Commerce, as well as government and community partners. Many of your businesses have hosted drop-off locations and collection drives, supporting thousands of children in need across the Marianas. I am confident that this year will be no different, and am excited to be working with you all. Together, we can make this holiday season brighter for thousands of children and help spread a message of hope. Thank you for all of your support. Let's make this year the best year yet. Semper Fidelis.
Thank you very much, Colonel Bob. We were hoping to have a representative today. I think we're having some technical issues, but we do appreciate our partnership with this worthy program. And we understand that, as difficult as times are, we appreciate any support you and your company could provide for our children in need this year. Members that are interested in collecting new and unwrapped toys are encouraged to contact the Chamber office via phone or email, and we will add your company name to the list of collection sites. Collection dates will be from October 4th through December 10th. We do have another quick couple of announcements. Our gala is officially canceled. The 97th anniversary celebration that was scheduled for October 2nd, this Saturday, has been canceled. Because of the current in-person pandemic restrictions, we could no longer support an event such as the gala. Although we are extremely disappointed that we cannot celebrate with you again this year, we would like to advise our members that are celebrating milestone anniversaries in 2020 and 2021, and that would begin with 20 years, then 5-year increments. We will still be recognizing them in a special but more simple and practical way, given the current restrictions. You will be receiving a letter via email regarding the details of this recognition, so please be on the lookout for this. The fourth quarter of the year is upon us, and it's time to consider candidates interested in serving on the Chamber Board in 2022. There are 7 seats that will need to be filled. Of the 7, 5 are 3-year seats and 2 are 1-year non-voting seats. To be eligible to run for the board, a candidate must be a member in good standing, with dues current and in the appropriate category, and understand and ascribe to the Chamber's Code of Ethics. This year's nominating committee is led by Christopher Duenas of Triple J Enterprises. Anyone interested in considering the position are encouraged to contact Chris or myself at the Chamber office. There is an official board candidate packet that will have to be completed and submitted to confirm a candidate's spot on the ballot. An opportunity to nominate a member from the floor will be provided at the October 26th general membership meeting. Winning candidates will be announced at the November 17th annual meeting. Voting will take place virtually. Please be on the lookout for details in this weekend's e-newsletter. Happy to introduce our speaker. All participants are on mute, so if you have any questions for our speaker, please feel free to send them via the question feature, and the Chamber team will pass these questions during the Q&A portion of the program. Our speaker is Guam's delegate to the House of Representatives and has served our island in this capacity since 2019. He is a member of the House Financial Services Committee, where he served as vice chairman in 2019 and 2020, our first appointment for a delegate from a U.S. territory in this committee. And he has served on the Committee on Natural Resources. He is a member of a number of congressional caucuses, including the Asian Pacific American Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Caucus on Korea, the Congressional Taiwan Caucus, the Future Forum Caucus, the U.S.-Japan Caucus, the Pacific Islands Caucus, and the Congressional U.S.-Philippines Friendship Caucus. From 2013 to 2019, our speaker served as senator in the 32nd, 33rd, and 34th Guam legislatures. He was Chief of Staff for Senator Carmen Fernandez in the 27th Guam legislature and subsequently served as Assistant Vice President and Financial Advisor at the Bank of Guam. Members and guests, please join me in welcoming our featured speaker today, Congressman Nicolas. Welcome, Congressman, and thank you for being here.
I'm here, don't worry. We're having technical difficulties. First, I'd like to begin by apologizing to the chamber and to the guests present. I tried to secure a conference room here in my remote office, and unfortunately, all the facilities are taken up. So I'm situated in the lobby of my apartment complex. So if we hear any background noise that sounds like the rabble of the hoi polloi, please forgive me, but under no circumstances was I going to miss our meeting here today, and for very good reason. As opened by Christine, the situation concerning our commercial activities on Guam is dire, and it's been dire for quite some time. I think that the entire chamber can agree that not only is the business environment highly unpredictable right now, but whether or not we're going to have any kind of bright spots in recovery just becomes a dimmer and dimmer outlook. And so we're in a situation now where we're trying to figure out how to navigate going forward. How do we move the island forward? How do we begin planning our business environment in a way that's going to allow us to get things back open, get people back to work, and get the economy rolling again? For the last nearly 2 years, we've been able to continue things at a reduced capacity, but at least having a significant amount of federal revenue coming into the coffers and circulating throughout the island. That resource, particularly with the expiration of PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance on September 6th, is quickly drying up. We're also receiving reports that some of the funding that was allocated all the way back to the CARES Act will start beginning to expire. And I am concerned, and we will be raising this concern in the days and weeks ahead, that some of the allocated sums may be expiring and not being utilized by the relevant agencies on the local level that have the authority to expend it, which would be highly unfortunate because any dollar that we can circulate into our economy is a critically needed dollar. And so, as pointed out earlier, the chamber and the business environment is struggling for, I think, no other reason than the fact that we're dealing with incredible uncertainty and the inability for us to plan accordingly in order to, open up in a sustainable way. The certainty is, I think, the most important component right now that our local business environment needs. Whether that certainty is highly positive or somewhat negative, there needs to be some kind of certainty, some kind of outlook that we can plan around so that we can know what to do and how to do it and to what extent. I think that the recent hype around reaching 80% vaccination and liberating Guam sent the wrong message, because it caused businesses to overinvest with an expectation that this was going to be an unfettering and a new beginning, and instead it turned out to be a bait and switch. And that kind of uncertainty is the most devastating when it comes to our business community, because overinvestment and over planning and expectations that are set unrealistically are the worst kind of situations you can put business enterprises into. Because once they begin to move in a certain direction with a certain set of expectations, and those expectations don't materialize, you've just added a significant variable to the chances of that business to continue as a going concern. And so on the Congress side, and with respect to what we can do federally, I know that there is a significant amount of interest on whether or not there's going to be continued relief. And I want to not be that public official who's going to give you any kind of misdirections that are going to cause you to make missteps in your planning. I'm going to give you very sobering realities that are going to at least arm you with the facts so that you know how to plan going forward. First and foremost, with respect to unemployment assistance, there has been chatter from the Biden administration to try and continue that, but there has been zero appetite in both chambers, in the House and the Senate, to do so. So as far as unemployment assistance is concerned, what we've received thus far, which was, I believe, among the highest, if not the highest in the country, is no longer going to continue. And if that reality changes, I'll be sure to inform the island as quickly as possible. But as of today and going forward, we need to operate as if pandemic unemployment assistance is no longer going to continue. There's been chatter about whether or not we're going to see additional funding into the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. There is a strong appetite to do so at a 100% level, which would satisfy all outstanding applicants. We have about 221 co-sponsors now on the House version of the bill that would do that. Unfortunately, there is no appetite to do so at such an elevated price point in the Senate. Long story short, and this isn't to throw partisan politics into the conversation, but we need to see if we can get 10 Republican senators to sign on to the legislation. We can pass this in the House, but if we don't get the 10 in the Senate, so we have a total of 60 in the Senate, getting this through a standalone legislation is going to continue to be a struggle. So if anybody has an aunt or an uncle in the Senate, please help us out and give them a call. But that's basically where we are at the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. As far as being able to secure funding for that fund in the reconciliation package, we are in a very, very critical and busy period right now in the Congress, because this week and potentially going into next week is going to be a mission critical period in terms of what's going to materialize in that reconciliation package. As far as restaurant revitalization, I can say that there is not much of an outlook in funding being provided into that particular category. So the good news is the full funding has significant House support, and we need to work towards getting Senate support for it. The bad news is funding, whether partial or otherwise, is not at this point now looking like it's materializing in the reconciliation package. But that's a very, very fluid situation, and we'll continue to apprise you on how that's going to turn out. Any additional relief that you may be hearing about, any chatter that you may be hearing about, would be news to me. The US economy, unlike our local Guam economy, is reopening fairly rapidly. Despite having lower vaccination rates, they are not, Guam is unfortunately among the highest new cases per capita. And so they're not facing the same kind of economic struggles that we are. Their source markets, particularly those that are driven by the consumer economy up here in the States, is pretty robust. Restaurants are full, venues are filling up, and we're not seeing the same kind of bleak commercial realities in the contiguous 50 as we're seeing, particularly in our territory of Guam. I've been in your establishments recently. I've seen how that lunch hour is no different than when you open up in the morning, and it's very, very unfortunate. So we need to move forward in a manner that's going to allow us to continue to operate. But whether that's going to come from federal relief or not, I want to make it very, very clear. There's not much. There's not much in the way of federal relief coming through, any additional federal relief coming through at this time. What we are able to secure is more along the lines of where the Congress is going as far as its sense of direction. Things are focusing very much on the administration's Build Back Better agenda. They're focusing a great deal on infrastructure, and we are securing significant sums in those two particular areas. And if you just give me a minute here, I'll pull up the data. First, we have in And as we mentioned, these were all covered in recent media reports. In the Natural Resources Committee, we are looking at the Department of Interior receiving in its budget reconciliation a gross total of $993 million for insular areas, of which about $345 million can be expected for infrastructure projects on Guam. We are also anticipating about $50 million for National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration funding, and $25 million for the Department of Interior's technical assistance programs, but those will be for all U.S. territories, not just for Guam. On the financial services side, we're looking at $125 million in additional funding for housing and community development block grants. The CDBG grants in particular are very, very attractive. That funding is normally limited to a $3.1 million level. We're able to increase that tenfold to about $31 million. I'm sorry, 10 times more, to about $31 million. And those CDBG grants are very, very flexible. They can be used for a variety of public purposes in hardening the infrastructure and improving the public facilities throughout the island. On education and labor, there's a potential approximately, I would say, $200 million that may be able to come to Guam for school infrastructure. Hopefully this can be utilized to fund outstanding school projects like Simon Sanchez, but I also know that the deferred maintenance price tag for all the schools throughout the island is somewhere up there close to $200 million. So, you know, deferred maintenance is more difficult to fund through bond financing versus actual capital school construction. So the utilization of grant money for deferred maintenance projects may be more strategic than using it for a capital project that can be funded through traditional financing means. And then, of course, we have about, I would estimate, close to $600 million in national defense authorization funding for military build-up projects. So altogether, we're definitely in excess of about $1 billion going into FY 2022. But for me, and being very, very frank, that's just not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough to, you know, be the panacea for what's ailing Guam economically, and for the recovery of our island to take firm footing. We've provided significant resources to the administration. There are significant sums, balances that continue to remain with the Department of Administration for them to utilize with the object categories provided by the U.S. Treasury. The governor does have her $600 million in addition to all those other grants that were provided for her to be able to utilize for economic recovery. And we're highly encouraging that that be done. The work that we've put in to try and secure additional resources for the hospital project are materializing federally. We're identifying federal dollars on the infrastructure side so we can free up those relief dollars that were provided under the American Rescue Plan. The tourism situation, the vaccination situation, and the recovery situation are just not looking like we're going to be seeing a light flip on and in 90 days everything's going to change. I think that those kind of unrealistic expectations were set. And I think that we're starting to realize that those unrealistic expectations are not only not going to materialize the way we'd all love them to, but that they've actually created additional injury in creating planning situations that perhaps might have overextended us in what is still a very, very lean and difficult time. I want to go ahead and pause here, Kathy, because I want to be able to take whatever questions the membership may have. I also, excuse me, I also have joining me on the call my Deputy Chief of Staff, Ms. Jennifer Wynn, and my Legislative Director, Ms. Tanelta Mori, as well as a couple other key members of my staff in the event that you guys might have questions or want some kind of guidance that I might not be able to provide directly. So let me go ahead and pause here, Kathy, and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Congressman. We do have questions and they're coming in through the chat, but I did receive some questions ahead of the meeting today via email. So if I may, we'll go ahead and get started. One of the questions is Guam or any other territory included in qualifying for EDA grants made specifically for Native American communities?
That is a very good question, and that actually opens up a conversation that I'm continuing to work on building towards, not only for the chamber and questions like these, but more specifically for our local leadership back on Guam. One of the things that I've observed, particularly during this infrastructure period, and also a little bit during the relief period, was directed funding specifically for Native organizations and Native purposes. And the reason this is significant is because those funding allotments are on top of what's already being received by the state. And so, for example, you'll have the state of Oklahoma receiving X dollars for housing. But then you'll also have Native funding going to housing that would benefit the tribes in Oklahoma. And so while the state is receiving a pot, the Native organizations are also receiving their own pot. And this is a conversation we need to have seriously with our people on Guam, because for decades we've been going in a certain direction when it comes to addressing the indigenous Chamorro people, self-determination, and those kind of questions. But over that same time period, because we've been completely neglecting the potential for Native recognition of our indigenous people, we've been losing out on an annualized basis on what would be potential additional monies for our island and for our people that we could be receiving on a Native basis. And so to answer your question specifically, Guam would not be eligible for any kind of Native specific grants. And if we do want to be able to access those resources, in addition to the hundreds of millions of dollars in other resources that are provided when we have these kind of Native funding rounds, we are going to have to begin acknowledging the fact that pursuing Native recognition for the Chamorro people in the federal government is going to be a path necessary for us to avail of that.
Interesting. Thank you.
We're going to be, and just to add to that, and so that the chamber can know what to expect, we're going to work on pulling together all of the Native federal dollars that have gone out over the years, so that we can have a sense of the scope of what we could have had access to and what we're going to need to consider having access to in the future. So there's an actual, an actual apples to apples comparison of what's going to be available if we go one direction or if we stay in the status quo.
Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, so our next question is, would the Congressman be supportive of the Guam Customs and Quarantine Federalization if approached?
This was a conversation actually that we had with you folks, and this was a conversation that was I think I've heard whispers over it during my time as a senator, and the fundamental question is, federalizing our customs and quarantine would in effect take us out, put us into the U.S. customs system. And so basically we would not be outside of the U.S. customs zone. That would in effect impact our duty-free status. And we would no longer be able to offer duty-free as a blanket reality on the island, because we would then be subject to whatever the U.S. customs and tariff schedules are. That being said, the federalization of our customs would result in all of our customs officers on Guam actually becoming GS employees, being paid at a GS wage level versus being paid at a customs local pay scale wage level. They would be funded by federal dollars versus currently being funded by the customs assessments that are placed on airlines and on cargo coming in. And all that money that we're saving from those assessments could either be used to reduce the cost of shipping and air freight, or they could be reprogrammed into our ports of entry for them to be able to enhance other services, and that would be entirely determined at the agency level. The fundamental question is, are there greater advantages for us to be a part of the U.S. customs zone and lose our duty-free status, or to remain outside of the U.S. customs zone and maintain that duty-free status? And what we're going to need help with from the chamber in particular is really coming to that conclusion. You know, what is like from a chamber perspective, the remnant value of our duty-free status? I know back in the 80s that was, you know, a major selling point. I know today, particularly during COVID, I don't think it's much of a selling point at all. The question is, going forward, how much more of a selling point is that going to be? The data clearly shows that 95% of our exports coming into our imports coming into Guam come in from the mainland United States. And so how much of that duty-free, tariff-free set of circumstances is really translating into commercial activity on Guam? If only 5% of our imports are potentially from foreign ports that may be adversely impacted by a reversion to the US customs zone. And then going forward, as I mentioned in my address earlier in June, Guam being outside of the US customs zone also means we are not a part of US free trade agreements, whether with Korea, whether with Japan, or if we were to adopt a Trans-Pacific Partnership, a TPP. My understanding is that TPP negotiations, gosh, maybe about 5-6 years ago, were not including territories because we are outside of the US customs zone. And so all of these things going forward would be impacted if we were a part of it, because then it would be, you know, it would be standard practice to write us into these free trade agreements, and it would be standard practice to write us into these Trans-Pacific Partnership agreements. And then what does that ultimately translate to in terms of us being able to build export-oriented economies, being able to grow our transshipment industry? You know, we create a lot of these working groups to explore these things, but when we don't have access to the markets because of things like being outside of the US customs zone, you know, how far are we going to go by bringing everybody into a room and talking about it versus what's actually available and what's actually out there? So would I support it? I would be absolutely open to supporting it if my business community also came to the table and said, you know what, Congressman, we looked at this and we believe that going in this direction is something that we're going to be interested in doing at this time. I'd be absolutely open to it.
That's great. We'll definitely have, we're having discussion on this. So I'm glad that this question was brought up, and it looks like there is some traction moving forward on this. So good. So our next question is for the infrastructure grant of 340 plus million, how many years would that be over? So I think the question is, you know, what was the length of time that they would be able to utilize this $340 million grant, infrastructure grant?
That is a good question. My understanding when I saw the language was that there wasn't a window, but my team is on the line and I'll make sure we get you guys that answer before this meeting is out. T, if you can pull up and just reconfirm for me whether or not what I said was accurate.
Super. Thank you. So our next question is there. Okay, so this person is asking something in reference to the Guam Invasive Species Council. So they're looking at strong support to be able to include air cargo for collecting additional, I guess, 80 cents per 1,000 pounds per airway bill. And apparently this requires FAA approval. So I guess the question is would you support this and ask the FAA to support this for Guam?
I would need to take a closer look at what's being asked. I do know that our invasive species protections, again, is something that's handled by our customs and quarantine. And whether or not this additional funding would ultimately go to customs in order to help them do their job better needs to be explored. One of the things about these kind of federal programs is that they're built around the US infrastructure. And so we can sign on to it if that's what everybody wants to do, but whether or not it's going to actually get to where it needs to go and the mechanics are going to play out the way it's intended on Guam specifically because of our unique custom status, that needs to be carefully looked at. So you know, invasive species is absolutely something we need to be careful of. We saw what happened with the rhino beetle.
Yeah.
I really think that if our hardworking customs and quarantine officers actually had the tools and the manpower and the resources, we could have prevented something like that. And then what happens is after the fact, when it does become a blight on our island, we expend resources on the back end trying to mitigate it, whether it's up at the university, using funding from GVB, and then whatever we're not able to damage control, we just see the poor trees falling apart. And that's just one example of how invasive species can ultimately translate into actual ecological harm and even economic harm. I mean, our coconut trees are a tourist attraction, as much as we don't like to try and look at everything from that lens. But I mean, it's a reality. The rhino beetle had economic devastation. And so if we can get more resources into the coffers of those who are going to do the job of making sure that we're protected from outcomes like that, then that absolutely could be a positive thing. But we need to make sure that's what's going to happen if we're going to support something that could potentially increase the cost of goods and services into the island. Because if that's ultimately going to be the outcome and it's not going to translate into the result that's intended, then it's going to cause harm and not be a solution. And that's a first and foremost a no-no.
Right.
We don't cause harm that doesn't turn out to be a solution. Whether it's vaccine mandates or roadblocks, if it's not going to fix things, don't make things worse. And that's not something that we're going to do in this office until we get the facts and until we're absolutely certain that that's something that's worth pursuing.
Understood. Thank you. The next question is, what is the status of the 2022 National Defense Act, and what of note does it contain for Guam?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. What is the status of the 2022 National Defense Act, and what of note does it contain for Guam? I guess, is there anything special, or is there anything in particular that would be noteworthy in reference to that money?
Sure. There are two items. The first is that we have in the NDAA language that's going to have the Secretary of the Air Force and the Commandant of the National Guard study whether or not bringing air capability into our National Guard, our Air National Guard, is something that's going to be worthwhile. This study should be completed, I believe, in February of 2022. And the benefits of studies like these is that it creates the foundational basis for resources in future NDAAs to be allocated to be able to make real what those studies reveal. And so we're hoping that the outcome of that kind of a study will make it very plain, and I think it really is plain, that aircraft capability for the Guam Air National Guard would be beneficial to the overall national defense strategy of the United States. We are, as we've said before, on the front lines of what's going on in Asia, and having that kind of air capability in our Air National Guard would just make us more responsive to whatever the air support or air defense needs may be, should those needs materialize. We're not going to want to start scrambling to make that kind of investment when the threats become even more pronounced, and knowing that the threats are existing and could potentially expand. We're going to want to make sure that our Air National Guard is going to have the capability. So we're going to initiate the study in this upcoming NDAA, and we're very, very excited for that. The other item that we were able to get in there, and this is a pretty big one, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it was about a year ago or 2 years ago, there was a story in the news about how Guam was not getting approved for federal grants that were going to assist in combating high intensity drug trafficking areas. And so what we did in the Financial Services Committee was we identified another grant avenue to target high intensity financial crime areas so that we can go after the money. We want to be able to have federal grants and federal resources and federal law enforcement all coming together to support our local regulatory regime so that financial crimes, money laundering, extortion, and those kind of crimes that are associated with the financial crimes, particularly drug trafficking and human trafficking, are going to have resources available to be able to stamp them out. And so in this NDAA, we also included language to allow Guam and other tribes and territories to be able to access high intensity financial crime area funding and federal support. And we're looking forward to that being a significant contributing factor to the very pronounced drug problem that we have on Guam. Whenever I run into constituents back home, a common theme that's always communicated is that the drug problem is just really spiraling out of control. And our Guam Police Department, is inundated. We were promised more police officers, and we're not getting them at the level that we were promised. And the desperation is really just settling in the community. And once drugs takes a hold of a family, and once they find their way into a home, it's very, very difficult when there are no resources to be able to push back on that. And so what we're hoping is with amendments like these and resources like these, we're going to be able to attack the problem at the source. And ultimately, when it comes to those who are pushing these things, they're trying to make money. And if we can interrupt that, if we can intercept that, and if we can disrupt it to a point where it no longer is as lucrative and as accessible, then we can have a significant impact on those kind of problems on Guam. And so that's a really big thing that we got into the NDAA. We also are securing additional funding authorizations for the continuation of the buildup that's going forward uninterrupted. And there were efforts to try and get robust funding in this round for the missile defense authorization, trying to build up an Aegis Ashore or equivalent. Unfortunately, the Missile Defense Agency on the federal side did not get their reports done on time for the appropriators in the committees to be able to have the documentation to back up the robust funding. So the commitments are all still there. Everybody's still on board, but there are certain procedures that are required in order for committee staff to feel comfortable telling their bosses to sign off on saying yes to the money. We were still waiting for those reports from the Missile Defense Agency. Once those come in, we're going to see the money really ramp up at that point. So we do have some small missile defense funding, but I'm looking forward to the next NDAA for that to really materialize. But I did get a commitment from the chairman that if that report is completed between now and before the next NDAA draft really gets written up, they're going to see if there are other workaround funding sources they can try to maneuver to be able to get some funding into that in advance. So everyone's on board with it. It's just a technical situation of when the money can actually turn on officially.
Sure, thank you. While this is a great information in reference to the NDA, we're looking forward to learning even more about the updates on the Missile Defense Agency money for Guam and actually for the region, right? So, okay, our next question. It doesn't look like we've got any more questions from the webinar group, but the last question that I do have here for you, Congressman, is it's a question I'm not sure I can ask because I could be violating a campaign, a federal campaign thing, but I'm going to ask it, and you can just say you can answer it or not. But can the congressman confirm if he is going to run for governor of Guam or if he is considering to do so?
We are seriously considering it, Kathy. And I'm not saying this in my official capacity as a congressman. I'm answering a question from a constituent and a group of constituents, but we're not campaigning at this time. But it is a question relative to me being on a call with all of you. Yeah, it's definitely consideration. We've provided significant resources over these last 2 years, and You know, there's just a serious need for us to be able to plan and execute. We have an execution problem. You know, for many years, for decades, Kathy, we've always been told there's a resource problem. Oh, we can't do it because no money. Oh, we can't do it because no funding. You know, oh, we can't lower taxes because there's no, you know, we need the money for this, or they're doing that. We took the money excuse off the table, and we've revealed behind the curtain that we have a serious execution problem. And this isn't necessarily targeted at any one individual or one administration, but it's the reality that's in front of us. And so one of the tenets of my public service, whether it was in the local legislature or whether it's in the Congress or in any other capacity the people would give us, if that's what they want to, if that's where they want us to be, is that we're going to provide the solution. We're going to be the ones to deliver on the outcome, or we're going to communicate very plainly why we cannot. And you know, that's something that I think we've demonstrated in these last couple of years, as difficult as it has been. But yeah, the situation on Guam at this point is not a resource problem. It's an execution problem. It's a consistency problem. It's an inability for us to be able to plan ahead, and it's a crisis of confidence. It's a serious crisis of confidence because we don't know if 3 months from now or 30 days from now, you know, we're going to close the schools or we're going to open them. Are we going to hit a vaccine milestone and be able to plan for the next fiscal year, or are we all of a sudden going to target the unvaccinated? You know, is the coin going to flip tomorrow and turn out to be heads, or is it going to turn out to be tails? You know, and in between all of that, when we say, where are we going to spend $1? And we say, well, I don't know, because I might spend it here or I might spend it there. I mean, there's absolutely no sense of direction, and there's no sense of planning, and there's no confidence. And that's not an environment that anybody can thrive in, no matter how much resources you make available. So we're observing all of that. We're observing it very objectively. We're not approaching this in any way from a position of, you know, winning or losing. It's about where the need is. And I'm hoping that these kind of conversations can communicate effectively to those who are coming up short, that this is what you need to stop doing and this is what you need to fix if you don't want to be having to deal with those kind of electoral realities in the next 9 months. Because quite frankly, you know, it's that kind of an undertaking is not easy. And there's a million and one reasons why we probably would not do it. But when it comes to serving the people of Guam, we'll absolutely always do whatever it is that they need us to do. So I'm hoping that, you know, if the current administration is listening, don't put us in that situation, and stop the uncertainty and get the resources out to the people, get that relief money out to the community, get the businesses the support that they need, get that GRT to come down, even if it's fractionally, but at least show good faith. You know, we cannot be blind and deaf and tone deaf to the situation that everybody's dealing with. So yeah, we're definitely considering it, and we're hoping that things change between now and then.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your candor. We appreciate the time that you and your team have spent with us today. We know that it's late, and you know you have taken time from your busy schedule to be with us. We truly appreciate that, sir. And we always enjoy a good conversation every time we have the opportunity. So we look forward to the next one. And I guess I don't see any other questions here. On behalf of the membership, thank you again, sir. And I will adjourn today's meeting.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.